In the middle of 1942, while the world was focused on the bloody battlefields of Europe and the Pacific, a group of trucks moved deep into the desert of New Mexico. Their destination was a remote plateau known as Los Alamos. Under the strictest secrecy, the United States government began building a city that officially did not exist. This was the headquarters of the Manhattan Project, a multi-billion-dollar race to build the first atomic bomb. The site was surrounded by high wire fences, guarded by elite military police, and removed from every map. Scientists were forbidden from using their real names when traveling, and every letter sent from the site was censored by military intelligence. To the Americans, Los Alamos was an impenetrable fortress of science, the most secure location on Earth. Inside this city of echoes, the greatest minds of the century, led by J. Robert Oppenheimer, were working to unlock the power of the sun. They believed that if they could build the bomb before the Nazis, they could end the war and bring peace to the world. The security was so intense that even the Vice President of the United States didn't know what was happening inside those desert laboratories. But while the American government was spending billions of dollars to keep the project hidden, the Soviet Union had already found a way inside. Joseph Stalin knew that whoever controlled the atom would control the future, and he had no intention of letting the Americans hold that power alone. While the FBI was busy looking for German saboteurs, they completely ignored the much more subtle threat of Soviet, ideological, spies. These were not men in trench coats hiding in the shadows. They were world-class physicists and dedicated engineers working right next to Oppenheimer. To them, the atomic bomb was too powerful to be held by just one nation. They believed that for the world to be safe, there had to be a balance of power. This dangerous idealism created a leak in the fortress of Los Alamos that no amount of barbed wire could plug. The most expensive secret in human history was about to be walked out of the desert in the pockets of the very men hired to create it. As the first prototypes of the bomb began to take shape in the New Mexico heat, a silent channel of communication was already opened between the desert and Moscow. Every breakthrough, every failed experiment, and every secret chemical formula was being recorded and prepared for transport. The Americans thought they were winning a race against the Germans, but they didn't realize they were actually running a race against their own allies. The stage was set for the greatest intelligence heist in the history of mankind, a betrayal that would turn the end of World War II into the beginning of a nuclear nightmare. Among the brilliant minds at Los Alamos, few were as respected or as quiet as Klaus Fuchs. A German-born theoretical physicist who had fled the Nazis, Fuchs was a mathematical genius whose work was essential to calculating the implosion needed to trigger a plutonium bomb. To his colleagues, including Oppenheimer himself, Fuchs was the perfect scientist, hardworking, unassuming, and completely dedicated to the project. He was so trusted that he was given access to the most sensitive areas of the laboratory, where the blueprints for the Fat Man bomb were kept. But behind his glasses and shy demeanor lay the cold, calculated mind of a committed communist who believed that nuclear secrets belonged to the Soviet Union. Fuchs was the ultimate ideological spy. He didn't want money, he wanted to change the world. He was convinced that if the United States held a monopoly on atomic weapons, they would eventually use them to destroy the Soviet Union. Every evening, after a long day of complex calculations at the lab, Fuchs would return to his small, Spartan room and recreate the day's breakthroughs from memory. He had a near-photographic mind, capable of memorizing intricate engineering diagrams and mathematical constants that described the exact dimensions of the bomb's core. To the security guards, he was just a lonely scientist working late. To Moscow, he was the most valuable asset in the history of espionage. The danger of Fuchs was his invisibility. Because he was an elite member of the British mission to Los Alamos, he was rarely questioned and never searched. He was part of the inner circle, attending top-level briefings where the most classified data was discussed. While the FBI was monitoring low-level workers for suspicious behavior, Fuchs was sitting at the table with the leaders of the project, taking mental notes on the density of plutonium and the timing of high-explosive lenses. He was a ghost in the machine, a man who understood the physics of the bomb better than almost anyone else, and he was preparing to give that knowledge away for free. By 1944, Fuchs knew it was time to move the information out of the desert. He requested a brief leave of absence to visit family in the eastern United States. In reality, he was heading toward a series of high-stakes meetings with a mysterious courier known only as Raymond. This was the beginning of the actual heist, the moment where the abstract math of the atomic bomb would be handed over in physical form. The Americans were building the most powerful weapon in history, but Klaus Fuchs was already ensuring that Joseph Stalin would have the keys to the kingdom. In the world of espionage, the most dangerous people are often the most ordinary. Harry Gold, a short, balding chemist from Philadelphia, was the definition of invisible. To his neighbors, he was a hard-working, lonely man who loved his mother. To the Soviet NKVD, he was a master courier with the codename Raymond. Gold was the vital bridge between the brilliant scientists in the desert and the Soviet handlers in New York. While Klaus Fuchs was the brain of the operation, Gold was the hands. He was a professional liar who had spent years living a double life, perfecting the art of the brush pass and the secret meeting in crowded parks. In June 1945, just weeks before the first ever atomic test, Gold traveled to Santa Fe, New Mexico, for the most high-stakes meeting of his life. The security around the Manhattan Project had reached a fever pitch, the FBI was everywhere, and the desert was crawling with undercover agents. Gold carried a torn map of a specific bridge in Santa Fe as a recognition signal. When he saw Fuchs walking toward him, he didn't stop to talk. They moved with the synchronized precision of shadows. In a brief, silent exchange that lasted only seconds, Fuchs handed Gold a thick envelope containing the complete technical specifications for the Fat Man plutonium bomb. Inside that envelope were the secrets of the implosion method, the most difficult engineering hurdle the Americans had faced. It contained the exact measurements of the plutonium core and the wiring diagrams for the 32 high-explosive lenses required to trigger the blast. This wasn't just theory, it was the recipe for the apocalypse. Gold tucked the envelope under his coat and immediately boarded a train, feeling the weight of the paper against his ribs. He knew that if he were stopped and searched, he would face the death penalty for treason. He sat in the crowded train car, sweating in his suit, surrounded by American soldiers who had no idea the fate of the world was sitting in the lap of the quiet man next to them. Gold delivered the documents to his Soviet handler, Anatoly Yakovlev, in a New York City bar. Yakovlev didn't even open the envelope. He simply nodded and vanished into the city crowds. Within hours, the secrets were inside the Soviet consulate, being microfilmed and prepared for a diplomatic pouch headed straight to the Kremlin. The Americans had spent $2 billion and 3 years of intense labor to build the bomb, but thanks to a quiet chemist and a torn map, Stalin now had the blueprints for free. The heist was complete, but the most dangerous part was just beginning. The Soviets had to see if the recipe actually worked. While Klaus Fuchs provided the complex physics, the Soviet Union needed something more practical, the actual mechanical designs of the bomb's components. For this, they turned to a young army sergeant named David Greenglass. Unlike the elite scientists, Greenglass was a machinist working in the high-security site at Los Alamos, the very shop where the high-explosive molds for the atomic bomb were being fabricated. He was a man with his hands on the hardware. Greenglass had been recruited by his own sister, Ethel Rosenberg, and her husband Julius, who were leaders of a dedicated Soviet spy ring in New York. To Greenglass, the secrets he handled every day were just pieces of metal, but to Moscow, they were the missing pieces of the puzzle. Greenglass used his position to observe the precise shape and structure of the explosive lenses that would compress the plutonium core. These lenses were the most guarded secret of the mechanical design. If their shape was off by even a millimeter, the bomb would fail to detonate. During his lunch breaks or late at night, Greenglass would hide in a corner of the workshop and produce detailed sketches of the molds. He wasn't a scientist, but he was a skilled technician, and his drawings were so accurate that a master machinist in Russia could replicate them perfectly. He was literally stealing the physical blueprint of the Fat Man bomb, one bolt and curve at a time. The most shocking moment of Greenglass's betrayal occurred during his scheduled leave in 1945. He met Julius Rosenberg in a secret apartment where they used a bizarre but effective recognition signal, a torn Jell-O box. Julius had one half, and the courier who would collect the secrets had the other. When the two halves matched perfectly, Greenglass handed over his sketches and a 12-page report detailing the internal workings of the Los Alamos machine shops. This was the instruction manual for the bomb. The Soviets now had the theory from Fuchs and the manufacturing secrets from Greenglass. They didn't just know how the bomb worked, they knew how to build it. The FBI remained completely unaware that a low-ranking sergeant was walking out of the world's most secure facility with the blueprints for the end of the world. Greenglass returned to his post at Los Alamos, continuing to work on the very bomb that he had already sold to the enemy. The American nuclear monopoly was an illusion. While Oppenheimer and his team were preparing for the Trinity test in the summer of 1945, Soviet engineers in Moscow were already setting up their own assembly lines. The race was no longer between America and Germany. It was a race to see how fast the Soviets could build a copy of the American miracle. At the center of this web of betrayal stood Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, a seemingly ordinary couple living in a modest apartment in Lower Manhattan. Julius was an electrical engineer with a quiet intensity, while Ethel was a former aspiring singer who shared his unwavering devotion to the Soviet cause. To their neighbors, they were just another hard-working family raising two young sons. In reality, their apartment was the operational hub for a massive Soviet spy ring. Julius was the master coordinator, the man who recruited David Greenglass and managed the flow of top-secret data from Los Alamos to the Soviet consulate. He wasn't just a spy, he was a talent scout for the Kremlin, convinced that he was helping to create a peaceful world by ending America's nuclear advantage. The Rosenbergs operated with a level of ideological discipline that baffled investigators for years. They didn't do it for money, they lived in near poverty, funneling every resource into their mission. Ethel played a crucial role in the deception, reportedly spending hours at their kitchen table typing up the handwritten notes and technical reports that her brother, David Greenglass, smuggled out of the desert. She was the gatekeeper of the secrets, ensuring that the messy sketches of a machinist were transformed into clear, professional documents that Soviet scientists could easily understand. Together, they turned their family home into a factory of treason, right under the nose of the New York FBI office. The couple's most effective tool was their ability to blend into the fabric of American life. Julius utilized his innocent connections in the engineering world to identify other potential recruits, building a network that stretched far beyond Los Alamos. They used everyday items like the famous torn Jell-O box to facilitate meetings between couriers and scientists, turning domestic life into a weapon of espionage. Every time a package left their apartment, it contained a piece of the American future. They were the architects of the bridge that allowed the atomic secret to cross the Atlantic, believing they were heroes of the global proletariat while the world sat on the edge of a nuclear abyss. However, the Rosenbergs' overconfidence would eventually become their undoing. Their reliance on family members like David Greenglass created a single point of failure that the FBI would eventually exploit. But in 1945, as the first atomic bomb was successfully detonated in the New Mexico desert, the Rosenbergs celebrated a victory of their own. They had successfully funneled the most lethal information in human history to Joseph Stalin. The atomic heist was now entering its final, most terrifying phase, the moment when the Soviet Union would prove to the world that the American monopoly was over. In July 1945, the leaders of the Big Three, the United States, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union, met in the ruins of Potsdam, Germany, to decide the fate of the post-war world. During a break in the negotiations, the new American president, Harry Truman, walked over to Joseph Stalin. He had just received word of the successful Trinity test in New Mexico and felt he now held the ultimate trump card. Truman casually mentioned that the United States had developed a new weapon of unusual destructive force. He watched Stalin's face closely, expecting a look of shock or fear, or perhaps a flurry of questions. Instead, Stalin's expression remained as cold and still as stone. Stalin simply nodded and replied that he was glad to hear it, and hoped the Americans would make good use of it against the Japanese. Truman was baffled. He walked away thinking the Soviet leader hadn't understood the magnitude of what he had just been told. In reality, Stalin understood it perfectly. Thanks to Klaus Fuchs and the Rosenbergs, the Soviet dictator had known about the bomb's progress for years. He knew the exact date of the test, the power of the blast, and the internal design of the device. While Truman thought he was playing a high-stakes game of poker, Stalin was looking at Truman's cards through a mirror. The moment Truman walked away, Stalin turned to his inner circle and gave a chilling order. Speed things up. He sent a secret telegram to Igor Kurchatov, the head of the Soviet nuclear program, telling him that the American success meant the Soviet bomb must be completed immediately. The heist had reached its goal. The political shock the Americans intended to use as leverage had been neutralized before it even landed. The Soviet Union wasn't just catching up. They were using the American research as a shortcut to bypass years of expensive trial and error. This encounter at Potsdam marked the unofficial start of the Cold War. The Americans left the conference believing their secret was safe, while the Soviets left with the blueprints for the apocalypse already in their hands. The atomic monopoly that Truman relied on was a ghost. Within weeks, the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki would be erased from the map, proving the bomb's power to the world. But in Moscow, the celebration wasn't for the end of the war. It was for the fact that, very soon, they would have the power to do the exact same thing. On August 29, 1949, at a remote test site in the steppes of Kazakhstan, a massive steel tower vanished in a blinding flash of light that turned the desert sand into glass. The shockwave rolled across the plains, announcing the birth of the Soviet atomic age. This was First Lightning, the first successful Soviet nuclear test. When American long-range spy planes detected radioactive debris in the atmosphere days later, the news hit Washington like a physical blow. Top American scientists, including Oppenheimer, had predicted it would take the Soviets at least 10 to 20 years to develop the bomb. They had done it in 4. The American government was in a state of total panic. They couldn't understand how a nation devastated by the war, with an economy in ruins, could have solved the most complex engineering problem in history so quickly. The answer was sitting in the classified files of the Kremlin. The Soviet bomb, codenamed RDS-1, was a near-exact replica of the American Fat Man design. From the dimensions of the plutonium core to the specific arrangement of the high-explosive lenses, the Soviets hadn't just built a bomb, they had built the bomb. The atomic heist had been so successful that the Soviet scientists had bypassed years of research, saving billions of rubles and thousands of hours. The successful test instantly changed the global balance of power. The American nuclear monopoly was dead, and the era of mutually assured destruction had begun. The United States no longer held the ultimate deterrent, and the fear of a Soviet nuclear strike began to seep into every aspect of American life, from school duck and cover drills to the construction of backyard fallout shelters. The theft of the secret had turned a one-sided victory into a terrifying stalemate. The realization finally dawned on the FBI: there had to be a leak, and it had to be at the very top. The hunt for the atomic spies began with a vengeance. Using a top-secret project called Venona, a massive effort to decrypt Soviet diplomatic cables, the FBI began to find the names and code names of the people who had betrayed Los Alamos. The trail led from the frozen cables of the NKVD back to the quiet labs of New Mexico and the small apartments of New York. The world was about to find out exactly who had handed Stalin the keys to the apocalypse, and the American government was looking for someone to pay the ultimate price. The aftermath of the atomic heist was a brutal reckoning that tore through the fabric of American society. As the FBI unraveled the network, the atomic spies were pulled from the shadows one by one. Klaus Fuchs was arrested in London and confessed, receiving a 14-year sentence. David Greenglass, hoping to save his own life, turned against his family and testified that his sister, Ethel, had typed the notes that doomed the nation. The trial of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg became a global sensation, a flashpoint of the Cold War that forced the world to choose sides. Despite international pleas for mercy, the couple was executed by electric chair in 1953, maintaining their innocence, and their silence, to the very end. The impact of this theft changed the course of human history in ways we still feel today. Because the Soviets stole the blueprints instead of developing the technology from scratch, the nuclear arms race accelerated by decades. It forced the United States to develop the hydrogen bomb, a weapon 1,000 times more powerful, just to regain an advantage, which the Soviets quickly matched using the same espionage networks. The atomic heist transformed the planet into a giant chessboard where two superpowers stood in a permanent state of Cold War, each holding a gun to the other's head. The stolen secrets turned a scientific miracle into a global hostage situation. Beyond the military consequences, the heist created a culture of extreme paranoia and secrecy that defined the 20th century. The freedom of scientific exchange was replaced by security clearances and top-secret classifications. The trust between nations was shattered, replaced by the realization that even an ally's scientist could be a rival's spy. However, some historians argue that the theft may have prevented a Third World War by creating a balance of terror. So quickly, either side could attack the other without ensuring their own total destruction. The stolen bomb created a terrifying peace that has lasted for over 80 years. Today, the story of the Manhattan Project is often told as a triumph of American genius, but the atomic heist reminds us that the battle for the future is often won in the shadows. The men and women who walked the blueprints out of Los Alamos didn't use guns or bombs to change the world. They used cameras, typewriters, and torn Jell-O boxes. They proved that a secret is only as strong as the person who holds it. As we live in a world still shaped by nuclear shadows, we remember that the greatest weapon ever created was stolen before it was even finished, proving that in the game of power, information is the most lethal element of all.